Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the drizzly grey streets of 1700s London, where the cobblestones are slick, the fog clings to your sleeves, and, believe it or not, holding an umbrella might get you heckled by complete strangers. You're bundled in layers, but the rain seeps in anyway, and as you lift your newly imported silk umbrella, you're met not with admiration, but with jeers, rolled eyes, and even a horse-drawn cab trying to splash you on purpose. Welcome to a world where staying dry is controversial. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting a high-stakes adventure, but your socks might. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing how far this sleepy history spreads. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rain starts slow, tapping on your hat like it's knocking politely. Then the downpour hits, and instantly your coat darkens with damp blotches. The gutters overflow. You duck beneath an overhang on Fleet Street, watching as pedestrians some clutching soggy newspapers, others just resigned to the downpour hurry past. You, on the other hand, decide to pull out your sleek imported umbrella. It's black silk, stretched tight over a spindly ribcage of baleen and brass. It opens with a firm click. Almost immediately, people stare. A couple of women chuckle behind gloved hands. A man in a tricorn hat mutters something about French nonsense. And across the street, a hackney carriage driver squints in your direction like you've just insulted his horse. Which, in a way, you have. You're not flagging a ride, you've brought your own shelter. This is 1750s London, after all, and nobody but a fool or a foreigner carries one of those ridiculous contraptions. See, at this time in Britain, getting rained on is almost a national pastime. A bit of dampness is considered character building, and umbrellas are seen as absurdly delicate, French, fussy, and in the male world, profoundly unmanly. Some people even equate them to parasols, which are strictly the domain of aristocratic women. Historians still argue whether this deep resistance to umbrellas came more from social class distinctions or national pride. Or perhaps it was simply the British love of stoic suffering. You begin walking again, umbrella aloft like a lonely sail. A young boy shouts, "Sissy!" and pelts you with a soggy apple core. A nearby priest pretends not to notice. You consider lowering the umbrella, but then recall the words of one brave man, Jonas Hanway, who refused to let public ridicule dampen his umbrella devotion. But we'll get to him properly soon. In the meantime, imagine you're part of a fringe movement early umbrella users forming a sort of underground club, like secret agents of dryness. You dodge a puddle, umbrella leading the way like a protective bat wing. It catches the wind and threatens to invert, but you steady it with both hands. Honestly, the thing is barely manageable. Somewhere, far off, a carriage driver curses. That's another problem. Umbrellas don't just offend public taste, they offend business models. If you're staying dry on your own, you're not paying someone to ferry you a few blocks undercover. You're disrupting the economy of wetness. It's worth noting that the umbrella wasn't even new to Britain. Aristocrats and travellers had seen them abroad, especially in Asia, where umbrella culture was centuries old. But bringing one back and actually using it on British streets? That's a statement. A quiet protest. A soggy stand for modernity. And it's not just about staying dry. It's about standing out. You pass a newspaper stand where a cartoon on the front page shows a man with an umbrella getting swept into the sky. He looks a bit like you, Probably meant to be a joke, but you can't help smiling. At least someone noticed. You round a corner and find yourself in front of a modest shop. Inside, a display of umbrellas stands proudly in the window. Each one looks slightly different, some taller, some daintier, some with carved ivory handles or silver studs. You didn't know there were so many styles. A small placard reads, "For the modern walker." You step inside. The bell jingles. The shop smells of waxed wood, damp fabric, and pipe smoke. The shopkeeper looks up, raising an eyebrow, but doesn't speak. He sees your umbrella, nods slightly, and returns to polishing a brass-tipped handle. You realize with a quiet thrill that you're among your people now. Even in a city that resists change, like an old oak resists wind, someone's always been first to open the canopy. You stand in the umbrella shop for a few minutes longer than necessary, just enjoying the shelter. It's quiet Incidino sloshing boots, or sideways glances, just a rhythmic ticking from the clock and the soft rustle of the shopkeeper handling fabric. You run a hand over the canopy of one model near the counter. Smooth silk, pale blue, clearly decorative. Parasols, the man says gruffly, nodding at the one you touched. Not built for this weather. You nod back, though you already knew. Parasols aren't for rain, they're for sun. And they've been around a lot longer than umbrellas, with a lineage so ancient it stretches into the sands of Egypt and the palaces of China. You close your eyes for a moment and let your mind drift back, way, way back. Suddenly, the fog of London gives way to the heat of Thebes. You're in ancient Egypt now, where the sun is not just Hotit's divine. Ra watches from above, and staying shaded is a matter of both status and survival. Here, parasols are symbols of rank, carried over the heads of pharaohs and high-ranking nobles. You don't carry your own heavens, no. That's what servants are for. A fringed, fan-like canopy on a long handle blocks the sun while you glide through the temple grounds. In some carvings, parasols resemble giant feathers. In others, they're more like fans on sticks. They offer no protection from the rain. There's barely any rain to begin with, but they separate you from commoners, from labourers, from heat, and from the burning stare of the gods. Historians still argue whether Egyptian parasols were ever purely functional or if they were always ceremonial. What's certain is this: they meant something. Being shaded was a statement. From Egypt, you meander east, landing softly in ancient China. Here, the parasol story takes on even more texture literally. Chinese artisans craft folding canopies from silk and paper, lacquered with oils to make them slightly water-resistant. Some are dyed in deep reds and yellows, the colours of power and luck. The Han Dynasty elites stroll with these parasols under the summer sun, their steps slow and purposeful. Here's your quirky fact for the night. In early Chinese texts, some parasols were recorded to have multiple stacked canopies up to 20 levels, not for extra shade, but to show just how rich and important the owner was, each layer a flex. Carrying one was like strapping a chandelier to your walking stick and daring someone to call you ostentatious. You take a turn and end up in India, where parasols again double as power symbols. They're used in religious ceremonies and royal processions, carried above deities during festivals. In some traditions, the number and size of parasols indicate the rank of a spiritual leader. They aren't just tools, they're metaphors: protection, divinity, prestige. The canopy is sacred. And somehow, none of this is about rain. That came later, much later. You open your eyes and blink back into London's damp grey. Still raining, Still 1700s. But now you understand the umbrella's ancestry a bit better. It didn't spring up one day like a mushroom. It had ancestors, resplendent, ceremonial, shade-casting ancestors that had nothing to do with English weather. The shopkeeper offers you a cloth to dry your umbrella. Not many come in asking about history, he says, not unkindly. You ask him about the most unusual one he's ever sold. He pauses. Once had a French traveller come through with one made of parchment. Said it kept the rain off just fine, but made a terrible noise in wind. You both chuckle. Imagine walking around, sounding like a crumpled letter, every time a breeze picked up. As you leave the shop, you notice a warning graving on the doorframe. Protection against the elements, foreign and domestic. A slogan? A joke? A little of both? You step back onto the street and hoist your umbrella again. The rain has slowed to a mist, and now your strange contraption feels almost welcome, or at least tolerated. But you can't help thinking, how did we go from temple parasols and royal shade bearers to being ridiculed in the streets of London for trying not to catch pneumonia? Umbrellas weren't born of rain, they were born of status, performance, and showmanship. And only much later, almost grudgingly, did they agree to keep anyone dry. Still, it's a start. You keep walking, your umbrella ticking quietly with every droplet, your thoughts now stitched together with silk thread and centuries of human effort. How curious, you think, that something so simple shade on a stick could take such a long, winding path to becoming practical. You're no longer in London. Not exactly. Your mind, lulled by the sound of rain and the rhythm of your steps, drifts once again, this time to Persia, sometime around the 9th century. You're in the bustling streets of Baghdad, a city of libraries, philosophers, merchants, and muddy alleys that flood with sudden downpours. Here, the concept of the umbrella begins to shift. The parasol is still a sign of class and religious stature, yes, but now there's rain to consider. Traders from India, where monsoon seasons shape daily life, have long used waxed paper and oiled cloth to keep their good sand occasionally themselves dry. The idea spreads westward. In Persia, someone has the wild idea to combine prestige with practicality. What if your umbrella also blocked the rain? And it works, sort of. You spot an early model. Wide, heavy, stiff. It does the job, but just barely. Still, in a place where the heat can blister and the rain floods streets without warning, the umbrella has begun its quiet evolution. Historians still argue whether this transition happened first in India, Persia, or even parts of East Africa, where monsoon rituals sometimes included ceremonial umbrellas. One theory even suggests that early rain umbrellas weren't used by people at all, but by priests guarding sacred objects during storms. Umbrella as holy shield. Now that's poetic. Back in India, artisans craft bamboo-ribbed designs with fabric treated in oils, designed to hold up against the seasonal deluge. It's not uncommon to see palace guards using them while standing watch. Still symbols of power, but now edging closer to utility. You imagine trying to hold one of those oily beasts in a London crosswind, probably end up airborne like a poorly dressed kite, but in calmer climates they're revolutionary. It's also around this time that folding mechanisms begin to appear. Not elegant or discreet, think more along the lines of collapsing tent poles, but folding nonetheless. People start tucking umbrellas under their arms, carrying them like lances, sometimes using them as walking sticks or impromptu shade tents. They're big, bulky, a bit ridiculous, and absolutely catching on. Your mind strolls into the Chinese courts again. There's an engineer name, long forgotten, designing a canopy that opens with a flick and closes with a twist. It's not quite portable, but it's progress. He adds a carved dragon's head on the handle, because why not? If you're carrying a tiny roof on a stick, it may as well look regal. You're struck by how much effort went into making umbrellas look impressive before they ever had to work well. That tells you something about humanity. We care more about appearing sheltered than actually staying dry. A bell chimes in your ear, London, again. A street vendor selling roasted chestnuts under a sagging cloth awning waves at you. Brawley's looking smart, he says with a wink. You nod and keep walking. Somewhere, along your stroll, through this patchwork of centuries, the umbrella shifted. It's no longer just a sunshade. It's a rain shield now too, born of practicality, though it still clings to its ornamental roots like ivy on a marble statue. And with this transformation, something else changes. The umbrella begins its long journey toward the middle class. No longer reserved for emperors or priests, it starts appearing in markets, carried by tradesmen, travellers, and eventually eccentric Londoners who don't care what the hackney drivers think. You pause beneath a lamppost, watching as the rain softens to a drizzle. A young man passes you, cloak soaked, shoes squishing with each step. He glares at your umbrella, but it's less contempt now, more envy. Maybe he'll buy one. Maybe he'll be the next to ignore the ridicule. You wonder how long it'll take before staying dry becomes respectable. You stay under that lamppost for a moment longer, the gentle hiss of drizzle all around you, your umbrella casting a soft dome of dryness over your shoulders. That young man with the soaked boots disappears down the street, but something about his glare lingers in your thought show. It wasn't angry, not really, just confused. As if his pride had never allowed for the possibility of dryness in public. You squint through the mist and drift again this time, southward and centuries back to the marbled courtyards of ancient Greece. You hear sandals scuffing stone, linen robes swaying in the wind, and the occasional clatter of clay pots. Here, umbrella saw more accurately, sciardiare used by women of status. They're light, decorative, and yes, very much for sun. But that doesn't stop them from being controversial. In classical Athens, the umbrella is already tangled in the weeds of gender. Women carry them, men do not. Or rather, men should not unless they want to invite mockery. You overhear a group of philosophers at a cafe, because even imaginary Athens has cafes in your sleepy version. They sip diluted wine and snicker about a certain aristocrat seen with a parasol. Was it to shade his pride, one jokes, or protect his delicate opinions? Another roars with laughter. Umbrellas here are both accessory and battlefield. In some festivals, slaves are made to carry them behind noblewomen, a symbol of social standing so obvious it's basically walking punctuation. This person is above you, and they don't even sweat. The Romans, predictably, inherit the practice and crank up the drama. Umbrella umbellae, in Latinare, seen mostly at gladiator games, not because anyone's worried about the fighters getting sunburnt, but because the spectators need to sip their wine and throw garum-laced snacks in comfort. Wealthy Roman women attend events shaded by colourful silk parasols held by attendants. The effect? Luxurious. The message? Clear. I paid for shade, so don't talk to me. But again, no rain. No one's even considering that possibility. Rome might have aqueducts and heated floors, but waterproofing? Not exactly a strong suit. Now here's a fun tidbit. Some Roman authors describe umbrella handles in poems as if they were weapon-sharpened walking sticks that could double as personal defense. Not surprising, considering Roman streets could be rough. and fashion often had to multitask. It's entirely possible that some parasols came with dagger tips. Form and function, baby. Historians still debate whether Roman umbrellas were ever used in drizzle-heavy provinces like Britannia, or if they remained strictly southern luxuries. No direct evidence survives of early umbrellas in the British Isles before the 17th century, but that hasn't stopped plenty of writers from imagining one poor centurion trying to open a sodden paper parasol in a Welsh thunderstorm. Back in your current timeline, London still, though with one foot in Romeo, catch your reflection in a rain-slick shop window. It's a little absurd. Your umbrella sticks up like a proud antenna among a sea of hunched, wet shoulders. And yet you don't mind. You feel a bit Roman, actually. A bit like someone above the fray. Not because you're rich, but because you're dry. A woman walks by and smirks. "Nice parasol," she mutters. You smile. You're not offended. If anything, it proves how much cultural memory is baked into these things. People still use parasol like it's an insult, when it's really just an ancestor. You think back to those early societies again, where parasols shaded queens and pharaohs, senators and high priests. They didn't care about the elements. They cared about status, separation, and symbolism. Maybe that's why the British had such a hard time accepting umbrellas at first. Carrying one made you look like you thought you were better than the rain. And in Britain, no one is better than the rain. The rain is the main character. You continue walking, umbrella held high. The rain has picked up again, more insistent now, but you're dry and warm beneath your little mobile roof. Somewhere deep in history, a Greek woman smiles, a Roman nobleman adjusts his servant's parasol, and a Babylonian priest looks up at the clouds and shrugs. They never thought of this as rebellion, but here you are rebelling gently, one dry footstep at a time. You keep walking, your umbrella now less of a novelty and more like an old friend, awkward, slightly clunky, but loyal in the drizzle. The city glistens with wet cobblestones and flickering lanterns. As you round a corner, you notice something peculiar. Dozens of people, all without umbrellas, lining up outside a theatre, rain trickling down their hats and coats without complaint. One man wipes his spectacles with a handkerchief, so soaked it spreads the moisture around more than it removes it. You pause and think, why are they putting up with this? Because this is England, and for centuries, getting rained on wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. A badge of endurance. An unspoken agreement between citizen and sky. You soak me, I keep walking. And for many years, the umbrella was seen as a foreign, objecton trustworthy, un-English, and somehow against the spirit of things. But here's the catch. Umbrellas were already available in Britain before they were accepted. They existed in sketches, in paintings, even in journals of wealthy travellers returning from Paris or Calcutta. They just weren't used. And then, they were. Enter the drizzle-drenched stage, Georgian England. Imagine it mid-1700s London, where rain falls more often than manners. The city's growing rapidly, but still dirty, crowded, and deeply set in its ways. Umbrellas do exist now imported, mostly, or custom-made for the eccentric wealthy. But if you use one in public, you might as well wear a powdered wig in the slums. You're sending a message, I think I'm better than this weather, and perhaps better than you. Historians still argue whether the resistance to umbrellas was more about British class anxiety or sheer stubbornness. Some say it was male pride, the idea that a real Englishman simply braved the elements. Others point to patriotism, a desire to separate from French and Italian customs, where umbrellas had long been fashionable. Either way, a damp head was a small price to pay for national dignity. And it wasn't just social sneering. There were practical deterrents. Umbrellas were expensive. Early models were heavysome, as much as 10 sand, made with oiled silk or wax fabric that smelled vaguely like wet candles. The frames were built from whalebone or wood, and the opening mechanisms were stiff, prone to snapping, and capable of taking out someone's eye in a crowd. Here's your quirky fact for tonight. The very first umbrellas imported into Britain often had handles carved from ivory or whale tooth, not because it was necessary, but because it looked exotic and expensive. In other words, an umbrella didn't just say, "I'm dry," it said, "I've been abroad, and I brought back luggage and attitude." Oh? Back on the street, a cab splashes a puddle near your boots. You think about how hackney drivers hated umbrellas with a passion, and for good reason. Before public transport was widespread, cab drivers made a living ferrying people short distances in the rain. If umbrellas caught on, why would anyone pay for a ride just to stay dry? There are tales half rumour, half truth of drivers throwing mud at umbrella users, shouting insults, even refusing fares to those carrying one. Some allegedly threatened to blacklist umbrella carriers altogether. One anecdote claims a cabby whipped his horse to drench a well-dressed man walking with an umbrella, calling out, "Let the rain sort out the fancy." And so, umbrellas became lightning rods not just for weather, but for class resentment. You pass an old brick pub now, warm yellow light spilling onto the street. Through the windows, you spot a row of coats hung neatly and not a single umbrella in the stand. Still a bit of resistance, you suppose. Or maybe just forgetfulness. In truth, umbrellas are slow to catch on in Britain. Not because they weren't useful, but because they demanded a kind of quiet rebellion. You had to ignore the stares. You had to want to be dry more than you wanted to blend in. And that, historically speaking, is always the start of change. You step away from the glowing pub window and into a deeper stretch of the street, your shoes clicking gently on the damp stone. Overhead, your umbrella keeps the drizzle at bay, and you begin to imagine what it must have been like for one of the first people to use one in public, not just anyone, but a particular someone. Jonas Hanway. If umbrellas had a patron saint in Britain, it would be him, though he'd probably bristle at the idea. Born in 1712, Hanway was a philanthropist, a world traveller, a pamphlet writer, and a man deeply committed to doing what he thought was right, even if it meant walking through London with an umbrella and getting pelted with trash for his troubles. You picture him now, tall, proud, probably with a wig tilted just so, and holding his umbrella like a sabre. In a city that mocked the very idea of staying dry, Jonas Hanway wasn't just dry, he was defiantly dry. He first saw umbrellas in use abroad, particularly in Portugal and Persia, and returned home determined to normalise their use in England, which, at the time, was roughly equivalent to walking through town with a parrot on your head. People jeered, children pointed, drivers tried to splash him deliberately, but he kept going. For nearly 30 years, Jonas Hanway walked the rain-soaked streets of London with his umbrella, often alone in his commitment. Historians still debate whether he was the first man to carry an umbrella in London. Some suggest a few merchants or foreign diplomats beat him to it, but he was certainly the most visible and the most stubborn. You pass by an alleyway now, narrow and gleaming with runoff. A cat darts across, and for a second you see a flicker of a figure in a powdered wig, umbrella aloft, head held high. Hanway's ghost, maybe, or just your imagination. Interestingly, Hanway's umbrella was no delicate trinket. Early accounts describe it as large, rigid, and probably built from cane ribs and oiled fabric. No folding mechanism, no spring, just a solid dome of defiance. The kind of umbrella that could double as a bludgeon, if need be. Not that Hanway ever swung it in anger. He was more about principle than pugilism. But let's be honest, carrying that thing through the slush of 18th century London required a certain attitude. He was mocked in newspapers and satirical pamphlets. Cartoonists portrayed him as fussy and effeminate. One illustration depicted him hiding under his umbrella while a tiny cloud chased him down the street, raining just on his head. And yet, the more they mocked him, the more visible he became. Quirky fact time. Hanway also campaigned against tipping waiters. Yes, this man was a one-man cultural earthquake. Umbrellas and service norms. He even argued that tipping encouraged laziness. Some people just crave uphill battles, don't they? You imagine him walking into a coffee house, shaking off his umbrella with theatrical flair, and sitting down at a corner table as every eye turned. Not with admiration, but suspicion. What kind of man protects himself from the rain? What kind of man declines to tip the serving boy? Jonas Hanway's answer, apparently, was a thoughtful one. There's something oddly comforting in that. That umbrellas in Britain didn't catch on because of a clever ad campaign or a royal endorsement, but because one stubborn man decided he was done being dampanned, was willing to be laughed at for it. And eventually society caught up. You hear footsteps behind you now. Another pedestrian, umbrella-less, coat pulled up to his chin. He hurries past with a nod. No judgment, just curiosity. Maybe tomorrow he'll visit the same umbrella shop. Maybe he'll remember your silhouette, upright and dry. You glance up at the canopy above your head slick, and glossy in the lamplight, a small piece of personal sky, and somewhere, you suspect, Jonas Hanway is smirking quietly in the rain. The rain slackens for a moment, turning from drizzle to a misty haze that floats rather than falls. You tilt your umbrella back just slightly to take in more of the city-dim lanterns flickering behind windows, smoke curling from chimneys, and the low rumble of wheels over cobblestone. It's peaceful, in that damp British kind of way. But you can't stop thinking about those hackney drivers, the ones who used to treat umbrellas like enemy combatants. You step to the curb, imagining a man in a tall hat and driving coat, reins in hand, scowling at a potential passenger who dares to stay dry on foot. It wasn't just resentment, it was economic survival. In 18th century London, public transportation meant horses, hackney coaches, sedan chairs, and later carriages. The business model was simple. People paid to stay dry. Rain meant profits. But then came this inconvenient little Devassier foldable roof you could carry in one hand. Suddenly, people didn't need to pay to avoid a soaking. They just needed the courage to carry one and endure the social snickering. And the drivers? Well, they weren't amused. There are stories half folklore, half truth about umbrella carriers being deliberately splashed, refused rides, or verbally harassed. One often retold anecdote tells of a driver who shouted, "You'll catch more than rain under that dainty dome," before flicking his whip to soak the umbrella user in street muck. Not the best customer service approach, but effective as a warning. Historians still argue whether this resistance was coordinated, a kind of umbrella mafia, if you will, just an informal culture of eye-rolling contempt. Either way, the message was clear. Umbrellas were for dandies and dilettantes, not for real Londoners. You pass by a crooked little stone building, once a coaching inn, now a bookstore. There's an old carved sign hanging above the door a coach wheel, cracked and mossy. You picture the kind of business that ran there. Tired horses, tobacco smoke, drivers complaining over bitter ale about those blasted umbrellas taking food off our tables. And honestly, you can't blame them. To them, umbrellas were disruptive technology. Here's your quirky fact. In some early pamphlets, hackney drivers compared umbrellas to foreign cheats, calling them unmanly, untested, and likely to collapse in wind anyway. One even claimed, absurdly, that umbrellas weakened the British spine by encouraging people to hunch under them rather than stand tall in the rain. Peak nationalism. You smile at that. Imagine the rain affecting your posture and your patriotism. But it's worth noting umbrella resistance didn't last forever. As more people embraced the practicality of staying dry, the stigma began to fade. Slowly, umbrellas went from being suspect foreign affectations to tools of the smart modern citizen. It helped that they were getting better, lighter, more durable, and occasionally more fashionable. Yet for a time, to walk through London with an umbrella was to declare war on tradition, business, and masculinity. It wasn't just an object, it was a statement. Like wearing sunglasses at night, or bringing your own seat to a concert. Practical, yes, but also bold. You think back to Jonas Hanway and wonder how many times he was refused service or nearly tripped by a coach wheel splashing mud. Probably more than a few. But he kept walking, and with each step he paved the way for others. You walk on, umbrella overhead, and glance around. You spot another one across the street. A woman with a long coat, her umbrella pale green with a wooden handle. She sees yours and gives a faint smile. Solidarity. Just two rebels in the rain. You cross the street slowly, your boots meeting the slick stones with soft, deliberate taps, and as you pass the woman with the pale green umbrella, there's the faintest sense of shared understanding, no nod, no words, just two people silently agreeing, yes, staying dry is worth it. And yet, it still feels like a small act of defiance. You turn down a narrow lane, hemmed in by tall brick walls. Rain trickles from the rooftops in lazy little waterfalls. And once again, your mind begins to wander this time, not to engineering or resistance, but fashion. Because in Britain, during those transitional decades, umbrellas weren't just about weather, they were about image. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, to carry an umbrella was to court judgment, especially if you were a man. The thing itself wasn't inherently offensive, it was what it implied. Umbrellas were associated with foreign habits, with vanity, and especially with women. That's right. Early British society viewed umbrellas as dangerously dainty. And so, the ridicule began. You imagine it now, an Englishman striding down the Strand in 1775, his cane replaced with a silk-topped umbrella, his cravat perfectly pressed, his wig powdered. To some, he's stylish. To others, he's asking for trouble. The jokes practically wrote themselves. Satirical papers depicted men with umbrellas being chased by gusts of wind, clinging to lampposts, or being carried off like sails. One cartoon shows an umbrella turning inside out, smacking its owner in the face, while a lady watches with smug delight. Another pamphlet features a man with a parasol being mistaken for a French spy. Here's your quirky fact. There were jokes claiming that umbrellas were so effeminate that carrying one might cause your moustache to fall off. No science to back that up, of course, but what a terrifying prospect. Historians still argue whether this resistance stemmed more from rigid gender roles or simple British snobbery, likely both. But it created a bizarre social paradox. If you wanted to stay dry, you had to risk your dignity. Umbrellas weren't just practical, they were political. But not everyone bowed to public pressure. A few brave soul artists, writers, merchants began adopting umbrellas anyway. Quietly, steadily, the stigma began to wear down. Still, most men carried them only when absolutely necessary, and usually tried to make them look like walking sticks when not in use. Disguised by handle. Women, however, embraced them with considerably more enthusiasm. Umbrellas and parasols, though still technically separate categories, became fashionable accessories among ladies of the Regency and Victorian eras. Not just for rain or sun, but for style. Some were decorated with lace, others embroidered with initials, and occasionally they had secret compartments for perfume bottles, love notes, or more mischievous items. You stroll now past a tall window behind which mannequins stand frozen mid-step in Victorian attire. One holds a parasol with a handle shaped like a swan's neck. It's beautiful, delicate, and entirely useless in a downpour. And yet part of the evolution. Even in mocking cartoons and overheard whispers, umbrellas were slipping into the public sphere. Slowly, men began choosing practicality over posturing. Maybe after enough storms, even the most stubborn gentleman couldn't ignore the fact that dry shoes were better than soggy ideals. By the mid-1800s, the tide had turned. You walk past a row of shops now, their awnings heavy with water. In one window, a painted sign reads Brooks and Sons, makers of gentlemen's rainwear. You peer in and see a line of umbrellas, neatly hung, their handles polished and elegant, not dainty, not foreign, just refined. Somewhere along the way, the umbrella stopped being a punchline and started becoming part of the wardrobe. The modern gentleman didn't just tolerate one, he matched it to his hat. You take one last glance into the window and smile. Fashion, after all, is just tradition dressed up for the weather. As you move along the glistening row of shop fronts, your own umbrella ticking gently with the rain, you begin to wonder what exactly is going on under this canopy you're carrying. Not in some philosophical way, but literally. How does this thing work? You pause beneath a gas lamp, the light fog catching in the air, and you angle your umbrella overhead, examining its intricate skeleton, spokes, stretchers, a central shaft, all perfectly balanced, holding taut the fabric that shields you from the drizzle. It's elegant, really almost like nature's own engineering, and so your mind slips back to the earliest mechanics of the umbrella, where innovation met inconvenience in equal measure. The earliest functional rain umbrellas in Europe were far from practical. We're talking silk or oil-treated canvas stretched over ribs made from whale, baleen, or cane. They were heavy, rigid, and opening one often required strength, prayer, or both. Folding? Barely. Portability? Marginal. These weren't so much on-the-go accessories as they were travelling burdens. Some early models came with wooden poles nearly as thick as broom handles, and the tips were capped with brass or ivory, ostensibly for elegance, but occasionally used for fending off dogs, or, in at least one recorded case, an overly aggressive goose. You step aside as a horse-drawn cart rumbles past. The rain claps against its canopy, and you watch the driver hunch forward under his dripping hat. No umbrella for him, too clumsy maybe, or perhaps just too proud. Now here's a quirky invention. In the early 1800s, one particularly enthusiastic innovator attempted to create a retractable umbrella that opened with a spring-loaded mechanism. The idea? Push a button, and voila, instant dryness. The reality? Exploding spokes, injured fingers, and at least one woman who was nearly poked in the eye during a demonstration. Needless to say, it didn't catch on. Still, people kept trying. Inventors in Paris and London started improving on the basic design. Instead of whalebone, they experimented with steel ribs, lighter fabrics, better hinges. One craftsman, Samuel Foxwood, eventually patented a paragon frame made with U-shaped steel rods, much lighter, much stronger, much less likely to turn into a violent pinwheel in the wind. Historians still argue whether Fox's version was truly the first modern umbrella. Some say the French beat him to the punch. Others point to independent designs in Vienna and Milan. What's clear is that everyone was trying to solve the same basic problem: how do you carry shelter with you without needing a footman and a warning system? You look again at your own umbrella's slim shaft, the precise click of the opening joint, the way the canopy holds steady even in a gust. It's so smooth, so ordinary now. But behind it is a century of frustrated inventors, broken fingers, and prototype umbrellas that collapsed like jellyfish when you needed them most. One failed design even tried to add wind vents flaps meant to reduce the sail effect. Clever idea, but unfortunately it also meant the rain came through. A classic case of fixing one problem by creating a wetter one. You pass an alley where someone's discarded umbrella lies crumpled on the ground, its ribs bent, fabric torn. Poor thing. Someone gave up on it. You give it a little nod of respect. It tried its best. And that's the truth, isn't it? For all their elegance, umbrellas are fundamentally awkward little machines. Their whole job is to resist nature, and they do it with metal, cloth, and sheer stubbornness. They fold up like origami, jab innocent bystanders on crowded streets, and somehow always manage to drip on your socks no matter how careful you are. And yet they persist. Because the alternative is wet hair, muddy sleeves, and that horrible feeling of cold water slipping down your spine. You tighten your grip on the handle, the mechanism humming with the tiny vibrations of raindrops above you, and you marvel at just how far this contraption has come from royal sunshades to unpredictable weapons to elegant, foldable shields. A simple dome of defiance, held together with steel and a little engineering magic. You keep walking, umbrella tilted slightly forward now, as the rain thickens to a more persistent patter. It's not a downpour just, the kind of steady English wetness that seems to settle into your bones if you're out too long. A perfect time to appreciate that, for all its historical baggage and comedic mishaps, your umbrella is doing its job beautifully. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, some of the earliest umbrellas caused more problems than they solved. You pass beneath a wrought iron archway into a quieter lane, the sounds of hooves and distant chatter muffled behind you. Here you imagine the kinds of mishaps people once endured when attempting to stay dry, like stabbing a fellow pedestrian in the chest with a wooden spoke, or snapping your canopy open with such force that it frightened a passing horse. Yes, umbrellas could be dangerous. Not because of their size or weight, but because nobody had really figured out how to use them gracefully in a crowd. One famous complaint from an 1802 newspaper described umbrellas as bludgeons of vanity, wielded by men who thought themselves kings beneath their dripping canopies. Another warned readers to beware of umbrella collisions on busy corners, as they were a leading cause of street altercations. And truly try walking with an early umbrella through a packed street without catching someone's hat, face, or corset in the ribs. Quirky fact alert. In the early 19th century, there was a real concern that umbrellas were responsible for an uptick in eye injuries among London's pedestrians. Some opticians even used umbrella-related accidents in their advertisements. One ad read, "Lost vision in one eye? It may not be your agate, may be your neighbour's umbrella." Oh, in response, some inventors began tinkering with so-called safety umbrellas. One design included blunted ribs with rounded ends. Another used flexible reed instead of steel, so that if the umbrella snapped back, it wouldn't impale anyone. A few even came with warning bells that jingled when opened, presumably to alert the unsuspecting public. But perhaps the biggest problem? Umbrellas weren't designed for British wind. A well-known story tells of a gentleman attempting to open his new umbrella on Westminster Bridge. A gust of wind caught the canopy, flipped it inside out, and yanked him off balance so badly he toppled into the Thames. He survived soggy and furious, but the story quickly became a favourite among umbrella critics. "A fine way to meet the fish," one columnist joked. Historians still argue whether these umbrella incidents were exaggerated by social commentators or genuinely frequent. Either way, it's clear, early umbrellas were temperamental creatures, especially in the hands of the untrained. You glance at your own, smooth, compact, easy to control, a quiet triumph of human persistence. But back then, umbrellas were clumsy status symbols and occasional projectiles. They made entrances dramatic and exits hazardous. No wonder people were reluctant to embrace them. Who wants to carry around a folded sail that might maim a stranger? And yet they endured. Some people even used the chaos to their advantage. You round a corner and imagine a scene in a muddy alley, two gentlemen in top hats arguing under the rain. One accuses the other of stealing his umbrella. A scuffle breaks out. Umbrellas clatter to the ground, ribs tangled. No one can tell which is whose. They each grab one and storm off neither, satisfied. There were even legal cases brought to court over umbrella confusion. No kidding. At least 2 disputes made it into public records, where claimants insisted their umbrella had been wrongfully retained by someone else. In one case, the defence argued that all umbrellas of that size and colour look the same, and the judge simply shrugged and dismissed the case. Imagine that being your day in court. You walk on, half smiling at the thought of lawyers holding umbrellas as evidence in a courtroom, cross-examining wet coats and muddy hems. The truth is, umbrellas have always straddled the line between absurdity and genius. They're not complicated, but using them well has always required a little finesse, a sense of timing, a careful hand. A good gust of wind can still undo you, but these days you're far less likely to injure someone or fall into a river. Progress, one dry pedestrian at a time. You stroll past a wrought iron fence dripping with rain, your umbrella keeping a steady rhythm above you plink plink plinkers, if applauding every dry step you take. And as you pass yet another row of Georgian windows flickering with candlelight, you can't help but notice something curious. Umbrellas aren't just tools anymore. They're accessories, fashion statements, conversation pieces, even punchlines. And this isn't a recent phenomenon. It started way back around the same time people finally stopped hurling insults at umbrella carriers and started complimenting their handles. Welcome to the Victorian era, where umbrellas were no longer simply tolerated, they were stylized. By the mid-1800s, Britain had begun to embrace the umbrella not only as a shield against weather, but as an extension of personal taste. The basic black model still reigned supreme, But makers started offering subtle variations for the discerning customer: curved ivory handles, engraved initials, hand-stitched seams. Some even had tassels. And if you were particularly fashionable, you didn't just carry an umbrella, you wore it. One popular design? A gentleman's umbrella with a hollow shaft that doubled as a cane. Elegant, practical, slightly pretentious, but very Victorian. You pause beside a storefront. In the window is a worn oil painting gown old man, crossing a cobbled street, cane umbrella in hand, top hat askew. His umbrella isn't open, but it's unmistakably there, hanging off his wrist like a loyal hound. The background is blurry with rain, his boots are spotless. Message received. Quirky fact for you: in the 1860s, some umbrella shops began offering evening umbrellas, slimmer, more decorative, with silver or mother of pearl handles. Meant not for storms, but for appearances. The kind you twirl while attending the opera, or lean dramatically against a wall while waiting for a cab you know will never arrive. This was also the era of umbrella etiquette. Yes, you heard that right. As umbrellas became more common, people needed social rules to manage them. A guidebook from 1875 actually instructed gentlemen on how to carry umbrellas in crowded streets. Always point the tip downward when closed, never open indoors, superstition and safety, and when walking past a lady, tilt your umbrella away so as not to splatter her dress with runoff. Historians still debate whether these rules came from actual safety concerns or just the Victorian obsession with codifying everything. Either way, umbrella behaviour became a measure of civility. To carry one clumsily was almost as bad as being caught without one at all. You imagine the scene now: a crowded London sidewalk, men tipping their umbrellas in passing, women ducking beneath canopies without ever breaking stride. An accidental nudge? A mumbled apology. A dropped umbrella? 3 gloved hands reached to help, and if yours turned inside out in the wind, you handled it with dignity, at least tried. Of course, the umbrella's rising status didn't stop it from being mocked. Cartoonists had a field day. You pass a newsstand with facsimile prints of 19th century broadsheets. One shows a couple on a promenade, the man clutching 3 umbrellas sewn under each arm and one between his knees, while his wife walks beside him, dry and unimpressed. The caption? Prepared for anything but her silence. There's something endearing about it, really, that a simple tool first mocked, then feared, then adored, could weave its way into comedy, fashion, and manners, all while keeping your hair dry. Even Queen Victoria herself was reportedly fond of parasols for sunny outings, though rarely seen with an umbrella for rain. Perhaps that was a personal preference. Or maybe, even at the height of its popularity, the umbrella still couldn't quite shake its association with the slightly absurd. But absurd, or note it, had arrived, from foreign curiosity to fashionable necessity. You walk on, umbrella angled just so, feeling not just protected, but quietly distinguished. The rain starts to lighten as you turn into a quieter lane, the sort of street where the puddles are shallow and the gaslights flicker like sleepy eyes. The sky remains a curtain of soft grey, and your umbrella casts a little bubble of solitude as you stroll. You start thinking about how the umbrella, in all its refined glory, didn't just belong to polite gentlemen or fashionable ladies. Oh, Noit found a whole new life in unexpected hands, including those of women with secrets. Yes, we're talking about umbrellas as tools of not just shelter or style, but mischief. Victorian women, especially those in urban centres like London and Paris, often carried parasols and umbrellas as part of their daily dress. But Hidden inside those dainty silk canopies and polished handles were sometimes little surprises, tiny compartments, concealed notes, or even wait for its smuggled contraband. You pass a wrought iron bench and imagine a woman seated there in 1878, gloved hands folded around the curved handle of her modest black umbrella. A constable walks past. She smiles, innocent, unremarkable. Little does anyone know, the hollow shaft of her umbrella contains 2 forged letters and a diamond ring meant for the docks. That's your quirky fact. Some women, in the late Victorian era, used umbrellas to transport love letters, laudanum tinctures, or stolen goods through crowded city streets. And because umbrellas were considered delicate, feminine objects, no one thought to search them. The umbrella wasn't just protection from rain, it was protection from suspicion. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Some claim it was exaggerated in penny novels and detective fiction. Others point to arrest records where umbrellas are specifically named as hiding places. Either way, it's clear. The unassuming brolly could be more than it seemed. Even beyond crime, umbrellas were tools of flirtation. In the hands of a practiced lady, a parasol could send message, open it slowly for intrigue, rest it on the shoulder to suggest shyness, tap it lightly against a boot to express impatience. Think semaphore, but silk and subtlety. You imagine a tea garden full of parasols, twirling slowly as women whispered and watched. The rain kept at bay, but so much else being communicated beneath those colourful domes. And speaking of messages, there's one delightful tale from 1893 involving a woman named Harriet Phelps, who carried an umbrella with a secret engraving on the handle. At first glance, it looked like a simple floral design, but close up, a tiny message. Meet me at the park gate after 6. She'd had it etched at a jeweller's and used it to arrange meetings without alerting her chaperone. Romantic, slightly reckless, very on brand for the Victorian era. You walk now past a cast iron railing in a narrow alleyway, and you can almost hear the whispers of women in bustled skirts, umbrellas in hand, plotting rendezvous and carrying secrets. The umbrella, in their hands, became a kind of language, part fashion, part signal, part shelter. And over time, as more women entered public life shopping, travelling, working the umbrella travelled with them. No longer just for aristocrats or coy flirts, it became a symbol of preparedness, empowerment even, not to mention practicality. By the 20th century, women were carrying umbrellas not just for fashion, but for business, for walking to offices, for standing at train platforms, for watching children and hailing taxis. Umbrellas weren't just frilly accessories anymore. They were tools for modern life. And yet, they never quite lost that whisper of mischief, that little smirk hidden in the curve of the handle. You tighten your grip on your own handle now, wondering what secrets it might carry, what stories it could tell if it had been passed through a few more lives. Perhaps none, perhaps a dozen, or perhaps just the story of one quiet walk through rain-slick streets, listening to the soft rhythm of the past falling gently overhead. You leave the narrow lane behind, your steps soft against the wet paving stones, the sound of rain no longer falling so much as whispering, the kind of drizzle that clings to your coat like breath. Your umbrella holds steady, unwavering, its fabric dark and glistening. And then you hear something strange. Raised voices. A clatter, a shout. You turn your head toward a nearby courtyard, tucked between a grocer's and a tobacco shop. It's there, through the wrought iron gate, that you catch a glimpse of 2 men in long coats, both clutching umbrellas, both dripping wet and clearly arguing. Loudly, you slow your pace, curiosity piqued. There's something comical, almost theatrical, about two grown men fighting in the rain with umbrellas. But this isn't fiction. This actually happened many times throughout the 19th century. You've wandered right into one of history's more overlooked oddities, the umbrella duel. Yes, you heard that right. While not officially recognized as duels, in the same vein as pistols at dawn or sabre bouts on the moor, umbrella fights were a real thing. In the 1800s, especially in crowded cities like London, Paris, and Vienna, umbrella disputes could turn physical. A misplaced canopy poke, an accidental jab in the ribs, or a suspected theft could ignite tempers faster than you can say paragon frame. One such documented case took place outside a London coffee house in 1847. A gentleman accused another of taking his umbrella by mistake identical black canopies being the norm. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and before anyone could intervene, both men began jabbing at each other in the rain, umbrellas clashing like awkward spears. Quirky fact time. Some police reports from the era actually list umbrella as the weapon in minor assault cases. One constable reportedly broke up a scuffle by grabbing both umbrellas and saying, "Gentlemen, kindly stop fencing and choose a proper sword if you must." But the stories didn't stop there. Another caseless documented, but gleefully retold in pub stills, of two shopkeepers who argued over a dripping umbrella hung too close to another man's coat. The result? A full-blown sidewalk brawl that ended with both parties on the ground, umbrellas broken, bystanders applauding as if it were a play. No injuries, just pride left in tatters. Historians still argue whether these umbrella duels were rare anomalies or part of a broader street culture of exaggerated masculinity. Likely a bit of both. In a world where civility was everything, the umbrella was both a tool of gentility and, occasionally, a bludgeon of impatience. You can't help but smirk as you walk past the courtyard, the echoes of those umbrella skirmishes lingering in your mind. The image of two gentlemen in top hats and rain-slick coats, circling like fencers, canopies raised like sabre-sits, ridiculous, and yet so perfectly Victorian. And, let's not forget, umbrellas were easily confused. Back then, most were black, cane-handled, with little to distinguish one from another. Public coat stands overflowed with them. Mistaken identity, convenient theft was common. Some even engraved their initials on the handle or added coloured ribbons to identify their own. You reach a small corner park now, the benches wet, the hedges trimmed low. You pause by a cast-iron lamp-post and glance at the umbrella in your hand. You wonder how many hands like yours once clutched similar handles, squaring off not in grand duels of honour, but petty, rain-soaked arguments over property, pride, and puddle proximity. There's something oddly human about it, that we took an object designed for comfort and an occasion used it for combat, that something meant to protect became, now and then, a reason to provoke. And yet, the umbrella survives it all. You step away from the park and continue down the slick path, the ghost of that umbrella duel fading behind you. The rain continues gently, and once again your little canopy of fabric shields you, not just from the weather, but from the chaos history nearly buried beneath polite silence. The drizzle settles into something steadier again, a hush of water falling in a slow, vertical sheet. You keep walking, umbrella still open above you, no longer a novelty or symbol, just a companion. but something feels different now. There's a sense, faint but rising, that the umbrella has become respectable, maybe even essential, and in this stretch of Victorian England, that shift is palpable. You pass rows of gentlemen in greatcoats, all carrying umbrellas, no jeers, no sideways looks, just quiet, practiced ownership. They carry them the way others carry canes or newspaper sand extension of the self, a statement not of rebellion, but of civility. What happened? Fashion, function, familiarity, but also time. It took decades for the British public to accept the umbrella, but eventually the tides turned. And when they did, the umbrella found a new home not just in shops or salons, but in the identity of the modern gentleman. You picture the scene. A man steps off a curb in Bloomsbury, lifts his umbrella with a snap, and tips the canopy slightly forward. A passing lady nods. He continues on, not thinking twice. It's muscle memory now. Second nature. Here's your quirky fact. By the 1870s, it was considered improper for a well-dressed man to appear without an umbrella in uncertain weather. Some etiquette guides even advise men to bring one, whether it threatens to rain or not, just to avoid appearing careless. A fashion item had become a social requirement. Of course, not just any umbrella would do. The black silk model became the gold standard. Sleek, understated, dignified. Anything too colourful, too ornate, or too short risked branding its carrier as foppish or foreign. And so, the umbrella settled into its uniform. Long, straight, black, with a curved handle and a quiet click. You pause beside a wrought iron railing, watching raindrops run down the bars. The umbrella above your head feels suddenly ceremonial, a little baton of dignity. And then there's the handlebar, yes, the handle. That's where personality could finally peek through. Gentlemen began requesting custom carvings, dogs' heads, serpents, birds, even busts of Queen Victoria herself. Not too flashy, mind you, just enough to suggest taste, money, and individuality. Some umbrella handles even had compartment-hidden snuff boxes, miniature flasks, or compartments for calling cards. One particularly inventive model had a tiny compass inset into the handle, perfect for the gentleman who wanted to stay dry and not get lost. And, in some rare cases, more than that. One black market variant offered a hidden stiletto blade inside the shaft. The gentleman's walking umbrella suddenly doubled as self-defense. It was the Swiss Army knife of its day, discreet, dangerous, and still technically very stylish. Historians still argue whether these weaponized umbrellas were practical or mostly theatrical. There are a few recorded instances of such devices being used mostly in self-defense, rarely in duels, but the very fact that they existed speaks volumes. The umbrella had gone from object of ridicule to trusted companion. It could help you walk through stormy streets, impress a client, or if necessary offend, off a pickpocket in a foggy alley. You reach a covered arcade now, the storefronts glinting with gaslight, their signs carefully painted in gold leaf. Inside one shop, a man adjusts a mannequin in a crisp wool suit. At its side, an umbrella. Of course. You step into the arcade's shelter and close yours with a satisfying click. The sound echoes lightly in the arched ceiling, like the end of a musical phrase. No one stares, no one scoffs. Your umbrella is just part of you. There's comfort in that, in knowing that the same object once mocked and feared is now quietly accepted, dignified, even necessary. And as the rain continues to fall on the glass roof above, You understand that the umbrella has earned its place not by force, but by persistence, one storm at a time. You walk slowly down the tiled floor of the arcade, your closed umbrella now resting gently in your hand like a well-trained walking stick. The rain above taps out a steady rhythm on the glass ceiling, muffled but musical, as if the city itself were exhaling through the weather. As you pass the elegant display shats, gloves, pocket watches, all arranged with geometric perfection, you realize the umbrella's transformation wasn't just social, it was also legal, technological, competitive, because once it became respectable, it became profitable. And with profit came patents. The 19th century saw a boom in umbrella innovation, folding umbrellas, spring-loaded umbrellas, shock-absorbing umbrellas. People were suddenly racing to improve something that, for centuries, barely changed at all. The simplest IT canopy and a stick was now a playground for inventors, engineers, and opportunists alike. You stop in front of a small shop, tucked between a tailor and a tobacconist. The sign reads, "Chandler and Holt, makers of patent rain deflectors." Through the misty glass, you see diagrams on the wall, skeleton frames, cross-sections, mechanical sketches that look more like flying machines than umbrellas. And, truthfully, they were flying machines at least in the hands of a strong breeze. Quirky fact for the moment. In 1852, a man named Samuel Fox patented the use of U-shaped steel ribs in umbrella construction. It was marketed as the Paragon frame, and it made umbrellas lighter, more durable, and less liable to decapitate a stranger on a gusty corner. Samuel Fox wasn't trying to revolutionize fashion. He just wanted umbrellas that wouldn't break every Tuesday. It worked. Fox's design quickly became the standard. Factories across England scrambled to copy it to patent slight variations. Some tried folding handles, others added telescoping shafts. One even designed an umbrella with two canopies, one above the other, to trap rain more effectively. That one didn't catch on, too heavy, too weird. But hey, points for creativity. And not all patent fights were civil. In one case, two rival umbrella makers accused each other of stealing designs and spent years in court, each one presenting umbrellas like murder weapons in a drama. Sworn statements were made about frame angles, fabric tension, and the exact length at which a handle could be considered ergonomic. Historians still argue whether these patent battles advanced innovation or just clogged the system with redundant filings. But one thing is clear, the umbrella business was serious business. And not just in Britain. You exit the arcade now, back into the open street, your umbrella snapping open with ease. The rain welcomes you like an old friend. Across the channel in France, umbrella makers were also experimenting with mechanisms, some with more flair, some with more risk. One Parisian model featured a collapsible cup built into the handle for refreshment during promenade. Another offered a wind-up music box that played when opened, delightful, useless, entirely French. Meanwhile, in Vienna, umbrella makers focused on folding designs. Pocket umbrellas, designed for ladies' handbags or gentlemen's briefcases, became a growing trend. They were often flimsy and difficult to fold neatly, but they looked modern, which, for many, was enough. You cross a bridge now. The river below, reflecting the grey sky in soft ripples. You pause at the railing and look down, your umbrella tilted just enough to shelter your face. It's incredible, you think, how much human effort has gone into perfecting something that ultimately just keeps us dry. From whalebone to steel ribs, From oil-treated canvas to waterproof nylon, from swords hidden in handles to folding magic tricksets, all been tried. And still, we keep tinkering. Because umbrellas are never just umbrellas. They're problems to solve, statements to make, patents to file. They're proof that humans, no matter how soaked, can't resist improving thing 7, the things that already work. You take a deep breath of misty air and smile. After all, it's just rain. But it's never just an umbrella. You linger on the bridge a moment longer, your umbrella forming a delicate dome above your head while the world flows beneath you, river, rain, the faint rustle of leaves in the distance. The water below swirls in slow spirals, reflecting the warm glow of the gas lamps and the cold grey of the sky. You wonder if, somewhere beneath that current, lies a long-forgotten umbrella, lost during a storm, its fabric now tangled with reeds and memories. And as the fog settles low over the water, you're reminded that the story of the umbrella didn't end in London, not even close. It travelled. Like tea and trains and cricket, the British umbrella spread outward, carried to the edges of empire, across seas, over deserts, and through jungles. It arrived in India, Australia, the West Indies, and parts of Africa as both a symbol of modernity and a strange, stubborn accessory that said, yes, it rains here too. And no, we don't wish to be wet. Alders. Umbrellas in colonial contexts were more than tools, they were statements of control. You imagine a British officer standing on a veranda in Calcutta, umbrella raised not just against monsoon rains, but against difference. The heat pressed down, the rains came sideways, and still the black umbrella remained an artifact of cooler climates forced into tropical use. Quirky fact. In colonial India, some British manuals actually advised newcomers on the proper posture to carry an umbrella while on horseback, too high, and you looked ridiculous. Too low, and you risked poking your steed or slapping a passing servant. The guidebooks, of course, assumed you'd have someone else holding the umbrella for you, ideally. And let's not pretend the umbrella's symbolism went unnoticed by the colonized. In many parts of Asia and Africa, umbrellas were already established markers of prestige and spirituality long before the British arrived. Kings and priests had used parasols in sacred processions, rain or no rain. In some traditions, the number of umbrella bearers trailing behind a leader indicated rank or divinity. So when British officials strutted in with their mass-produced models, it wasn't introducing something new, it was laying claim to a tradition that already existed, just under different names and fabrics. Historians still argue whether British umbrella use in colonies was about practicality or power projection, perhaps both. But the visual was hard to ignore. A solitary figure beneath a foreign canopy, dry amid the storms, separate from the world around them. You step away from the bridge and continue through a narrow street lined with old warehouses. One has faded signage above the door. Wellington and Company, tropical umbrellas. You imagine crates stacked with canopies designed for fierce sun rather than rain-light weight, vented, perhaps painted white. They weren't just exporting goods, they were exporting ways of being. In some colonies, the umbrella took on new lives. In Burma, now Myanmar, ornate ceremonial umbrellas, gold and crimson, were used in royal rituals long before and long after British influence. In Ghana, umbrellas feature in traditional festivals even today, held above chiefs like shimmering crowns. There, the umbrella is still sacred, still symbolic, still deeply not British. and yet-tone design began to appear everywhere. The long, dark, collapsible model with its steel bones and cloth skin, the one you're holding now, practical, quiet, global. Even as cultures kept their own versions, the British umbrella crept into daily life abroad. In cities like Nairobi, Delhi, and Sydney, local craftsmen began making their own variations, sometimes cheaper, sometimes sturdier, sometimes brilliantly colourful. You pass a poster on a nearby lamppost modern, peeling at the edges. It advertises a travelling exhibit, shelter and symbol, the global journey of the umbrella. You smile at the timing. Maybe you'll visit it. Or maybe you're already walking through the best version of that museum. A rainy city, your own feet, and the sound of a soft drizzle tapping overhead. Because the umbrella, for all its social baggage and colonial detours, remains what it always was, shelter in motion. A roof you can carry, a boundary you control, a gesture, sometimes quiet, sometimes proud, that says, I see the storm, but it won't touch me just yet. You keep walking, umbrella steady overhead, the streets narrowing again as you slip into one of those older corners of the city where the cobblestones look a little more uneven and the walls lean inward like old neighbours whispering. The rain hasn't let up, but it's gentler now, more of a hush than a threat. And in this quiet space, the umbrella seems less like an object and more like a quiet gesture of defiance, which brings you, unexpectedly, to protest, because somewhere along its winding journey, the humble umbrella became a tool not just of fashion or practicality, but of resistance. It's easy to overlook umbrellas seem so ordinary, but in the right hands, on the right day, in the right crowd, they become shields, signals, symbols of unity. You pause beneath a crumbling brick archway and feel the weight of that history settle in. You might think of Manchester in 1819 St. Peter's Field, the infamous Peterloo Massacre. Protesters demanding parliamentary reform had gathered peacefully, some even bringing umbrellas for the drizzle. When mounted troops charged into the crowd, umbrellas were lifted not as weapons, but as shields. Makeshift barriers, a way to guard against clubs and sabres and chaos. And later, in the suffragette marches of the early 1900s, women used umbrellas to protect themselves from crowds and press photographers. In one photo, a group of marchers walk shoulder to shoulder beneath a canopy of umbrellas, each one a small assertion of dignity in the rain. Quirky fact for this one. One suffragette, Edith Garrod, famously trained women in jiu-jitsu and self-defense, many of whom carried umbrellas not just for weather, but to conceal wooden batons. If things got violent, the umbrella snapped open and the baton came out. Rain or no rain, that's preparation. Historians still argue whether the umbrella's role in these movements was symbolic or merely incidental. But there's no denying the imagery. A crowd of people standing together, holding umbrellas like a field of flowers or a patchwork roof. There's something quietly powerful about that. And then there's Hong Kong. You stop beneath a low street lamp, the glass fogged and flickering, and think of images more recent. In 2014, during the umbrella movement, thousands of protesters filled the streets of Hong Kong to demand democratic reforms. When police fired tear gas and pepper spray, people lifted umbrellas yellow, black, red, blue to block it. Some even formed umbrella walls, shielding strangers from gas and rubber bullets. What began as a simple act of protection quickly became a symbol. The umbrella, once used to guard against drizzle, now guarded against power. It was painted on banners, printed on shirts, turned into sculptures and stage props. Yellow umbrellas, especially, became icons of resistance. You picture a sea of them now, canopies raised not for rain but for rights. It's a sobering image, a reminder that even the quietest objects can speak loudly when they need to. And in a way, it makes perfect sense. The umbrella has always been about boundaries. The space between you and what you don't want touching, weather, expectation, or injustice. It's a line you carry with you. A little portable no. You pass a graffiti-covered wall, and though the rain has washed away most of the paint, a faint shape remains. A yellow arc, faded but unmistakable. A nod, maybe, to that same spirit. And so, as you move along the street, you carry a little more than you did before. Your umbrella is still an umbrella fabric and frame, clicks and folds. But it's also part of something bigger. A lineage not just of design and invention, but of refusal. From London's jeers to Hong Kong's marches, it's been there, quietly opening its arms and saying, "Not today." The street begins to widen again as you follow the curve of the buildings toward a small, tree-lined square. The rain softens even further, now less a fall than a presence in the air, like mist with memories. You move slowly, letting your umbrella coast gently above you, no longer thinking about getting somewhere, just walking for the sake of it. You pause at the edge of the square, where a low iron fence surrounds a small public garden. Inside, a few benches glisten with moisture, and the gravel paths are littered with fallen leaves. You spot an elderly man sitting beneath a yew tree, his umbrella propped at his side, forgotten for the moment. You give him a nod. He nods back. A quiet little exchange between fellow travellers under the same weather. And you think, it's not just the umbrella itself that has evolved over the centuries, but how people use it. Especially in the Victorian and Edwardian eras, umbrella etiquette became almost comically intricate. People didn't just own umbrellas, they studied them. Manuals outlined how to carry one without offence, how to open one without chaos, and how to close one without soaking your own feet. A full behavioural code, complete with diagrams. Here's your quirky fact. In 1883, The Gentleman's Guide to Umbrella Deportment was published in London, detailing rules such as never open a dripping umbrella indoors, do not rest your umbrella tip on another man's boot, and one must never swing the umbrella while walking, lest it be taken for a fencing challenge. You stroll through the garden gate and onto the gravel path, umbrella angled to avoid the overhanging branches. You imagine the old etiquette lessons echoing around you. Tilt just slightly when walking beside a companion. Always lower the canopy before entering a doorway. Never rest the wet tip on furniture, it's a mark of vulgarity. And heaven forbid you leave one behind in a church pew, that was a scandal. Historians still debate whether these rules were universally followed or mostly aspirational, like napkin folding and monocle polishing. But in the image-obsessed world of late 19th century Britain, how one handled their umbrella could be as telling as how one dressed or bowed. And of course, umbrella faux pas extended to storage. There were umbrella stands, ornate ones in the homes of the upper class, simple ones in shops and churches. And umbrella thieves too, lurking by the exits. The fear of walking home in the rain without your prized paragon frame umbrella was real. Some people even stitched little fabric tags into their canopies that read, "If found, kindly return to 42 Wexford Street reward offered." You pass a sign at the edge of the garden. Please lower umbrellas before entering the conservatory. You chuckle. Even now, the echoes of etiquette persist. You spot another walker on the far side of the squarier woman carrying a bright blue umbrella, swinging it slightly as she goes, probably breaking 6 historical rules just by enjoying herself. Good for her. And then you realize something else. Umbrella behavior may have once been about manners and propriety, but now it's about personal rhythm. People use umbrellas the way they carry themselves. Some wield them like shields, arms rigid. Others let them float, loose and casual, catching the wind like little kites. Some walk in twos under a shared canopy. Others walk alone, canopies tilted like questions. You find a bench dry enough and sit for a moment, umbrella resting against your shoulder. The fabric still catches the occasional droplet from the trees above, but you're protected, enclosed, and oddly aware of the space it creates around you. Because that's the other thing about umbrella etiquette. Wasn't just about behavior, it was about boundaries. How much space you occupied, how much water you might share, where you ended and others began. And maybe, even now, that's the real magic of umbrellas. They don't just keep us dry, they teach us quietly, comically, politely how to move through the world in the rain. You rise from the bench, the rain barely more than a memory now, and walk once more beneath the trees, your umbrella still open not because you need it, but because it feels right, comfortable, familiar, like a hand on your shoulder. The path leads you back into the city proper, where the buildings grow taller and the echoes of footfalls return. And, as you walk, a thought drifts in, uninvited but charming. Umbrellas may be polite and practical, but sometimes they're just plain weird. Because for every elegant black paragon frame model, there's an umbrella that makes you wonder what exactly the designer was drinking. Welcome to the wonderful world of novelty umbrellas. You pass a toy shop with a colourful awning and pause outside the window where a half-dozen umbrellas spin slowly on display. One shaped like a frog, one with cat ears, one that's literally a slice of pizza. You can't help but grin. Novelty umbrellas aren't new. In fact, they've been around almost as long as umbrellas themselves. The Victorian era, surprisingly, loved a good gag. Makers crafted umbrellas with handles shaped like pistol grips, monkey heads, even tiny cages containing fake birds. If it could be carved in wood or cast in brass, someone would stick it on the end of an umbrella. One famous example from the 1880s featured a handle that, when twisted, played God Save the Queen on a tiny hidden music box. Delightful. Terribly impractical in the rain. Quirky fact: in the 1920s, one inventor designed an umbrella with a small built-in ashtray in the handle, because of course nothing says glamour like smoking in the rain while holding your own roof. Historians still argue whether novelty umbrellas reflected mass-market creativity or a desperate attempt to make the mundane magical. Either way, the trend never truly disappeared. By the 1960s, kids could buy umbrellas shaped like rocket ships. In the 80s, there were umbrellas with disco lights. And now, you've got umbrellas that change colour when wet. Ones with Bluetooth speakers. One with a handle shaped like a lightsaber, because why not protect yourself from both the rain and the dark side? And let's not forget the infamous hat umbrella. You know the one. A mini canopy strapped to your head with a band, freeing your hands and your shame, seen often at cricket matches. And nowhere else, because nobody wants to be that guy. You chuckle as you walk past a cafe where someone's left a novelty umbrella leaning against a chair. It's shaped like a flamingo, legs and all. Even the most practical among us, it seems, sometimes want a little absurdity in our weather defence. And maybe that's the real appeal. In a world where rain can be relentless, The idea of laughing at the clouds, just a bitis irresistible. You remember being a child, splashing in puddles under an umbrella shaped like a duck, bright yellow, big eyes, a beak on the top. You felt invincible under that silly dome, like rain couldn't touch you, like the sky was just playing. And even now, walking through this city, your own sensible umbrella in hand, you feel a flicker of that same feeling. Rain can be gloomy, grey, cold, but an umbrella whether solemn or absurd reminds you that you've got something between you and the storm. Even if it's got googly eyes. You leave the cafe behind, your steps a little lighter now, perhaps buoyed by the image of someone shielding themselves from the rain under a flamingo-shaped umbrella. And as you wander further into the city's winding streets, you begin to notice something curious. Everywhere umbrellas. Black ones, blue ones, striped, floral, translucent domes, some tall and proud, some sagging like tired flags, folded ones peeking from backpacks, bent ones abandoned by bins. It's as though, without realizing it, you've joined a quiet parade. But of course, not all umbrellas are created equal. As more people carried them, the question became, how do you carry it more easily? Enter the folding umbrella. You spot one now being carried by a teenager ahead of you, slung casually from the wrist like a bracelet. Compact, light, clearly built for speed rather than grandeur. It's easy to forget, but this humble invention took an extraordinary amount of time to catch on. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, umbrella makers began experimenting with smaller, more portable models. The goal? Convenience. The challenge? Physics. Umbrellas, by nature, want to be big and rigid. Folding them required complicated hinges, collapsible ribs, and fabric that could withstand being crushed repeatedly. Quirky fact for this section. The first truly pocket-sized folding umbrella, known as the Nerps, was invented in Germany in 1928 by Hans Haupt. Nerps literally means little one in German. Haupt had injured his leg in World War I and needed a walking aid, so he invented a collapsible umbrella to carry along with his cane. It was a hit, but not immediately. Historians still argue whether the folding umbrella was seen as too modern, at first too gimmicky, too fragile. Many early models were prone to jamming, or folding when you didn't want them to. And some fabric couldn't survive being stuffed into a handbag over and over again. Still, by the 1950s and 60s, the folding umbrella had become a global sensation, advertised in glossy magazines, sold in department stores, given away as airline gifts. Now, you could keep a whole roof in your coat pocket, and if the weather changed suddenly as it does, you were ready. Compact convenience became a mark of urban sophistication. You reach a crosswalk now, standing beside a businessman scrolling on his phone. His umbrella, folded, clipped to his briefcase. A woman next to him? Her umbrella is shaped like a tulip when closed. Everyone's got their own version, their own style, and none of them are getting wet. But even now, the folding umbrella remains a bit divisive. Some swear by them. Others still prefer the long cane-like models, with sturdier frames and a satisfying heft. One folds, one stands tall. Two philosophies of dryness. You continue across the road, thinking of how many times you've forgotten an umbrella, how many cheap foldables you've bought at train stations, how many you've loaned out and never seen again. They're like pencil lighters. Umbrellas migrate. They pass from hand to hand, from train to cafe to taxi. Some even get left behind deliberately, their owners trading the burden of carrying for the thrill of dancing in the rain. And yet, somehow they always come back. Folded or not, umbrellas endure. You reach a park entrance now, and glance at the folded umbrella in your other hand. Compact, light, dependable. It may not have the drama of a gentleman's cane umbrella or the charm of a frog-shaped canopy, but it's yours. It's kept you dry. It's been there in the storms. A little roof in your palm. You step into the park, the path crunching softly underfoot, the trees above swaying gently as if brushing the sky clean. Around you the air is hushed, thick with mist and the faint scent of wet leaves. And as you walk under the canopy of oaks and chestnuts, it strikes you, for all its centuries of evolution, the umbrella has also found its way into something much more playful, even poetic. Culture, because once it stopped being an object of ridicule, the umbrella became something else entirely. A symbol, a prop, a metaphor, a visual cue for elegance, power, comedy, even danger. Take, for instance, the word bumbershoot. It's almost impossible to say it without smiling. Bumbershooter, delightfully American, slightly whimsical term for umbrella that popped up in the early 1900s. A mash-up of umbrella and parachute with a hint of cartoon energy. No one's quite sure who coined it first, but it became popular in vaudeville and music halls, where saying bumbershoot was guaranteed to get a giggle. Quirky fact: bumbershoot was used as the name of a Seattle music and arts festival starting in 1971, chosen, quite literally, because it meant something to everyone, whether they carried one or not. Rain or shine, the bumbershoot was part of the mood. And then there's gamp, a Britishism you might have heard in old novels. Derived from Sarah Gamp, a fictional nurse in Charles Dickens's Martin Chuzzlewit, who was rarely seen without her comically large and battered umbrella. In her honour, perhaps in gentle mockery, the term gamp came to mean any oversized, tattered, or wildly unfashionable umbrella, the kind that might turn inside out in a breeze or drip suspiciously even when closed. Historians still argue whether Dickens was making fun of umbrella carriers or simply capturing a character's comfort object. Either way, gamp stuck in the Victorian lexicon and lives on in crossword puzzles and cosy mysteries. You pass a pond now, its surface glassy and untouched, except for the occasional ripple from a falling leaf, and you think of all the umbrellas that have danced through popular culture, from cartoons to cinema. Mary Poppins, of course, floats in on hers graceful, serene, powered by more than just wind. Her umbrella isn't just a mode of transport, it's a personality, a talking companion, a promise that magic often hides in the most ordinary places. You smile at the memory. Then there's the Penguin, Batman's old nemesis, who turns umbrellas into weapons, flamethrowers, even helicopters. A villain with style. A gentleman gangster with a twisted sense of humour and a deeply impractical arsenal. In classic noir films, umbrellas become symbols of betrayal and mystery. In musicals, they twirl like dance partners. In anime, they hide blades. In poetry, they evoke romance, sadness, and the gentle ache of grey skies. The umbrella is everywhere. And maybe it's because it's always been with use in the background, sure, but always nearby. A quiet co-star, a trusted extra. You walk on, watching a small child on a bench nearby, trying to open a too large umbrella. He fights with the latch, fumbles, finally gets it open with a triumphant "Ha!" The canopy snaps wide, nearly toppling him over. His mother laughs softly. You've seen that moment before. Maybe you've been that child. It's always a little magical, The first time, that tiny roof unfolding, that hush as the world gets quieter inside, that sense that even if it's raining, you're in control. And isn't that why we keep them? Not just for the weather, but for what they say. I came prepared. I've got this. Let it rain. You continue through the park, now tracing the path as it curves around a stand of trees, your umbrella still held loosely above you. You barely notice the rain anymore. It's become part of the atmosphere, soft, almost ambient, the kind of rain that makes the world quieter without making it sad. And as you step beyond the trees, you realize something else. Umbrellas aren't just useful and symbolic. They're everywhere in the stories we tell, in books, films, music, even dreams. They've slipped into our cultural imagination in ways so subtle, we sometimes forget they're there. You pass a wrought iron bench where someone has left a forgotten newspaper soaked and fluttering slightly in the breeze. The headline doesn't matter. What you remember is the image, a silhouette under an umbrella, walking away into the rain. It's always that image, isn't it? One figure, one umbrella, a street lamp maybe, a puddle or two, and a certain feeling melancholy, mystery, maybe hope. Umbrellas are visual shorthand for distance, for waiting, for resilience. In cinema, they appear just when things are quietest or most chaotic. In The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, they're pastel-coloured and romantic. In Blade Runner, they're neon-lit, futuristic, and slightly menacing. In Singin' in the Rain, they're pure joy Gene Kelly, using his as both prop and dance partner in a moment of sheer cinematic magic. Quirky fact: Gene Kelly's umbrella in that scene had to be reinforced with steel ribs because the original bamboo frame kept snapping during rehearsal. The rain wasn't fake, it was piped in through studio plumbing, and it soaked the entire set, including his wool suit. Umbrellas, it turns out, are tough co-stars. You pass a lamppost now, its base surrounded by puddles. Someone's leaned a forgotten umbrella against a simple one, plaid, collapsed but not broken. It looks like it waited for someone for a long time, then gave up. You don't touch it, it feels like part of the scenery. And then you think of how often umbrellas represent not just weather but connection. In romantic comedies, the umbrella is the classic device. Two people huddling under one in the rain. Strangers who become friends, friends who become lovers. That moment when someone says, "Here, get under," and suddenly the world shrinks to just the two of them, dry and close and maybe a little breathless. You've seen that scene in a dozen films. Maybe you've lived it. Maybe once, a long time ago. Historians don't track the first time umbrellas appeared in love stories, but they've been there as long as characters have been dodging rain. They offer intimacy, vulnerability, excuse. It's raining becomes a reason to lean in. Even in music, umbrellas appear again and again. Let a smile be your umbrella. I'll be your umbrella on a rainy, rainy day. And of course, Rihanna's Umbrella, where it becomes an anthem of loyalty and protection. You laugh softly to yourself. Who would have thought a fabric dome could hold so much emotion? And maybe that's the point. The umbrella doesn't just block weather. It frames us. It puts a moment in parentheses. It makes a scene out of nothing. Rain becomes romance. Grey becomes cinematic. You, under your umbrella, become someone walking through something rather than someone just getting wet. You stop by a pond as a duck waddles by, unbothered by the rain. And you wonder if it's only humans who need umbrellas. The duck seems fine. But then again, maybe the duck has never had its heart broken on a cobbled street in a downpour. You smile and keep walking. You leave the pond behind, the duck waddling off toward whatever appointments ducks keep on rainy afternoons. Your feet move slower now, not from fatigue, but from something else savouring. The walk, the rhythm, the feel of the umbrella, above your head, like a soft punctuation mark in the drizzle. And as you pass under another low-hanging branch, you begin thinking of umbrellas not just as objects of the past or symbols in media, but as little pockets of memory, personal ones. Because we don't just carry umbrellas, we remember them. Maybe yours was a birthday gift. Maybe it was stolen. Maybe it was borrowed during a storm and never returned. Maybe it snapped in a gust and you mourned it. Or maybe you left it in a taxi and didn't even notice until the rain caught you the next day. People rarely name umbrellas, but they're often unforgettable. You step onto a quiet street, lined with antique shops and dusty window panes. One store, filled with clocks and faded postcards, has a tall rack just inside the doorway. 6 umbrellas of different eras, leaning together like old friends at a bus stop. You imagine their stories, one with a wooden handle that's smooth from use, another with faded tartan cloth, one still speckled with paint left behind, perhaps, by an artist who got distracted. Forgotten umbrellas are time capsules. Their fabric holds weather and seasons and moments we've long left behind. Quirky fact: there's a small museum in Italy dedicated entirely to the umbrella and parasol. It houses over 1,000 umbrellas, including royal models, war-era examples, and absurd novelties. One of its most prized pieces? A 19th century umbrella with a built-in flask for brandy. You'd like to think whoever carried that one stayed both warm and dry. You pass another shop with an old copper sign, umbrella repairs, a dying trade perhaps, but still there, still useful. Some umbrellas are too special to toss. A grandfather's cane umbrella, a mother's floral parasol, a child's first frog-shaped shield. You think of yours now. Not just the one in your hand, but all the ones. The one you carried through college. The one that flipped inside out at the exact moment you confessed something you shouldn't have. The one you shared with someone who once mattered more than they do now, and the one you bought after that. Historians don't track umbrella ownership like they track wars or monarchs. But if they did, every person would have their own private timeline, not of dates, but of storms, and how they got through them. Sometimes you braved the rain, sometimes you ducked under an awning, but most often you opened the umbrella, stepped out, and kept walking. That's what they're for, not to stop the rain, but to remind you that you can move through it. You cross another street, the sound of tires hissing through puddles. A stranger walks by, their umbrella larger than yours, striped blue and white. You don't speak, you don't nod, but for a few seconds your canopies pass in parallel, like ships beneath separate sails, and then you each disappear down your own path.